Welcome to our table talk and conversation on today's gospel at the rectory. Today, as you know, is the Feast of Christ the King. This feast is the last Sunday in ordinary time because next week we begin the new year, liturgical year that is, of 2021. And so today's liturgy, we proclaimed Christ as King. Every liturgy proclaims Christ as King, but today in some way we coalesced that. And we kind of have the entire liturgical year coming to an end. And so as we look at today's readings, we're going to talk about what is this kingdom of God. And today we learned that Jesus comes to proclaim the kingdom of God, that Jesus is a king, but in the most unique way. In our history books, I'm sure you remember, kings were absolute. They wanted absolute conformity. Kings were powerful and they really held on to their power. And they exerted their force because that made them kings. Kingship in Jesus is very different. For Jesus, kingship has to do not with this world, but the next. And this kingship and this kingdom doesn't exist here or there. It exists in our hearts. So as a result, what is Jesus looking for? Our hearts, to live this message of the gospel. And today at Mass, I really did concentrate on the gospel because it was just so powerful. But also we saw in the first reading how God is his own shepherd, bringing people in. The king who brings his people in. In the gospel reading, 4 times, we have, again, constantly telling us what the acts of mercy are. This Jesus is a king of mercy. What is mercy? Mercy is a form of love, but it's love in brokenness. Mercy comes better from the Latin word for mercy, which is misericordia. Miseria, to suffer in one's cordia, in one's heart for someone else. So if you were in Brooklyn, you might say, have a heart for this person. Let your heart feel for this person and do something. So, these acts of mercy that Jesus really emphasizes today clearly have possessed his mind and clearly make this part of the message of the gospel. To feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to visit the sick, to visit the infirmed, to be present to people in their brokenness. And as I said, there are many ways to be hungry. There are many ways to be thirsty. We look at each of these acts of mercy. Why? Because if we look at the text, we find in Ephesians that God is rich in mercy. When we are people who allow our hearts to be touched by the sufferings of others, we are most imaging God. That is how the mercy of God is present in today's world. In John 14:24, we read, "Those who love me will keep my word." Those who love me will keep my word. So it's an act of doing. It's not necessarily an emotional feeling. It's an act of doing what Jesus has said. So let's look at those acts of mercy and take them apart. And then to see the mind and the heart of Jesus in these acts of mercy. I said at Mass, to be hungry is not only to eat, but also there are people who are hungry just to be recognized. There are people, particularly at this time, how are we hearing this in our time of COVID, who are locked in their apartments, who are thirsting for a phone call, who are thirsting to speak to someone. To clothe the naked means not only giving to the local clothing drive, it means never to embarrass someone or to restore someone's dignity if they have been hurt. To visit those imprisoned. Yes, there are people behind prison bars, but there are some people who are imprisoned. They're imprisoned by fear. They're imprisoned by a poor self-image. To build them up. And to visit the sick. There are many ways of being sick. Many, many ways. Mental ways, physical ways, spiritual ways. These are the acts of mercy. The other acts of mercy are also to counsel those in need. Someone wants to speak with you because they have to unburden themselves from a problem. to give counsel to the doubtful. Look at all the people here who think we will never get out of this situation, or people who are doubting the presence of God. To warn the sinner, to be courageous and say, please, if you continue doing this, this is not good for you. To bear patiently with people who have wronged us. Now, if you're going to follow Jesus, and if you're going to be a person in mercy, you need to know that there's a cross involved in this. You're going to get pushed back. To forgive. To forgive. This is really important. I would not want to go before the face of God having a grudge against someone else. Why? Because Jesus is so much obsessed with forgiveness and mercy. And finally, to pray for the living and to pray for the dead. All of these move us out of ourselves to other people. These acts of mercy, how do you do them? Where do you do them? Well, they cross our desks, they cross your kitchen table, they're present in your family, they're present in your work situation. You don't need to search for the need or the practice of mercy. It's right in front of us, with so many of the personal encounters which we have with people in our daily life. And notice we're doing these things very frequently, not realizing we're doing these things. That's exactly what the gospel said. They didn't realize. When did we see you naked? When did we see you, Lord? When did we see you? In those other people. In those other people. So when was the last time you saw Jesus? We look now at our spiritual life. What is the goal of our spiritual life? The goal of our spiritual life is to grow in imitation of Jesus. So, coming to Mass, receiving Eucharist, saying our prayers, meditating, offering the rosary on the story of the life of Jesus. Why? Not necessarily to get something, although they are filled with graces, but to be like Jesus. The prayer to conform our minds and hearts to the mind of heart of Christ. Therefore, for Catholics, we are never alone. It's never me and Jesus, it's Jesus and us. Jesus and me and the whole church. So our spirituality, one must have a personal relationship with Jesus. Jesus must be real to you, not an image on the wall, not something that's far away. And how do we do this? Through the Eucharist, through meditating on the sacred text, to being present in the community. This is where we encounter Jesus. This is where we come to know the mind and the heart of Jesus, and therefore we are taught how to do these things. Why? Because we love Jesus. In her instruction, Clare of Assisi, contemporary of St. Francis, wrote to one of her spiritual daughters. And what does she say here? She's writing to Agnes of Prague. And she tells Agnes of Prague that this is what is important that you do. That you reflect on Christ, that you consider Christ, that you contemplate Christ, and that you imitate Christ. The goal of prayer. The goal of prayer. So, we are called today and every day to live the gospel. If you go to Bay Ridge, there is a monastery of the Visitation Sisters. I said Mass with them for almost 20 years. You pass the gate, and there is their logo. Live Jesus. Viva Gesù. Now that means, yes, live Jesus in the sense of praise, but also live Jesus in me. Live Jesus in this situation. Live Jesus in what happens in the normal course of every day. Is this difficult to do? Yes, because you know why? It's not our first reaction. Someone offends you, what is our first reaction? The natural reaction is probably to get even. We have to stop and think. If we want to be disciples of Christ, there has to be another way to deal with this. There has to be another way to right wrongs. And it has to be lovingly and mercifully. So, following this Jesus, remember, a crucified Lord, can be difficult. But you have a choice here. We can be people who are baptized, or We can be people who take our baptism and turn it into discipleship. So, as we end on this last Sunday of the year, the liturgical year of 2020, again, let us call out Viva Gesù in all that we do. Have a good Sunday.